All right, welcome. We're going to talk about open APIs today, crushing your EMR conversions and legacy challenges. So my name is Peter Chang, and I have Dave Levin here, and we'll run through the presentation today. Please, we'll leave some time after for questions if you have any. All right, you guys can read, so I won't go into too much detail about my background. I am a hospitalist by trade. I did finish my residency about 5 years ago and have been the CMIO at TGH for almost 3 years now. Dave is far much more accomplished than I. He has been the CMIO at some really neat places, so he's sort of a mentor of mine, and not older, but wiser, as I say. So you can also take a look at our conflicts of interest on the next slide. So our agenda for today is looking at new ways to manage legacy data as you convert from one EMR to the next. And that happens for many different reasons. I'll go to a little bit about the history of why we changed EMRs. And then our results. I think that's probably the most important part of it. We'll go through our journey and how the results are and what benefits we seek to gain from this experiment, as I call it, with Dave. And then, of course, Dave's going to cover the broader potential of APIs in healthcare and show how you could potentially apply this for your applications where you are. So, and first, we're going to describe some of the challenges that occur and limitations from converting EMRs and what data comes, what data does not come, and how we manage that to bridge that gap as you convert systems. We're also talking about open APIs as an alternative to traditional data sharing methods. So everyone knows the common data migration that occurs as you move from one system to the next. And in our situation, we ended up having a mixture of both, and I think that's why it was so successful. And then Dave's going to cover some additional opportunities and other use cases in which you may use these open APIs for EMR integration needs, and then apply these best practices and technologies in looking at how you apply these. So, of course, looking at provider satisfaction. So, by trade, I am a doc, so information is very important when you look at management of a patient, that historical gap. It depends on the type of patient that you're seeing. So if I have a pediatric cardiologist who's now taking care of a 14 or 15-year-old patient, the legacy data is very important for them because they need to go back and see what sort of anomalies that patient may have had and how that disease process progresses, especially if it's a different physician taking care of that patient 10, 15 years later. Looking at, of course, why we're all here, it's for our patients, right? So we want to make sure that the data that's there is accurate and appropriate for management of that patient. And then, of course, how we secure the data. So, there's a whole cybersecurity wing here at HIMSS on the floor. And, having just an open swamp of data sitting there for somebody to prey on, we have to make sure that we're securing it appropriately. And then, of course, the bottom line, how can we save money as we progress through this process? So, what if? That's the main question, right? What if you could provide this data to your providers, in real time, so that they're not having to dual screen, log off of one system, log into another system to get that legacy data for their patients? It has to be seamlessly integrated into their workflow. Otherwise, you're unsuccessful for that same reason. The swivel chair back and forth between EMRs is not going to win you the points with the providers. And then, of course, it has to be fast, easy, and cheap. I hate to use the word cheap, but I think the bottom line drives a lot of what we do in healthcare. And so it has to be a fraction of the cost of what we typically regard data migration is. When you look at any project, I have my imaging guys up front. We look at different systems, and the biggest issue with switching any system is the potential of hundreds of thousands to even price tags in the 7 digits, looking at how you migrate that data from one system to the next. So we did it, and you can too. I think I want to shout out to Dave's group, our own IT. I think I'm not successful unless I have a great IT team behind me, and also the IT team at USF. So to give you a little bit background history on what happened, so we're about an hour and a half over on the other side of the coast. We're about a 1,000-bed quaternary referral center, and we partner with our academic affiliate, the University of South Florida. So we came up on Epic in 2011, and at that time, USF was on Allscripts. And through many discussions, they decided to transition their EMR to Epic almost 2 years ago. It was August of 2015. And so we drive about half of each other's business. So for our patients, it was a very good idea, and providers too, to have a single instance of an EMR so we could share that data across. So this is actually an image of what the viewer looks like, and I think I worked with Dave's team as much as I could to design something that was as close to an EMR. So the way this works is in the chart review section of Epic, there's just a little button up at the top that you click on. It passes your credentials through the system and then pops this screen up. And so the nice thing about it is that you can sift through data in many different ways. You can look at just labs if you wanted to see labs. But I think the most important part of this is that we segregated it according to encounters. So let's say I'm a provider and I know I saw this person 6 months ago or a year ago. I actually remember the visit in my head. I could actually go back to that encounter and see the notes, the orders, the labs associated with that encounter. So I think that provided another level of segregation of data so you can find it a little bit easier. And so the common problems, so I'll tell the story of, I went through explaining my history because I also went to medical school at USF. So I had the strange and interesting situation of asking my old professors that taught me in medical school what data they wanted to bring into the EMR and the conversion. So I used to make the joke of approaching that professor when I was in medical school and saying, hey, you know that question on the test? I don't think it's right, it's not really accurate, you need to throw it out. And of course they would never do that for me, and now the shoe's on the other foot and I have to ask them what data they want to throw out and not leave in the migration. And it's a very cumbersome task because what's important to one is different to the other. So my wife is also a pulmonary critical care doc with the University of South Florida, so I'm like the hair club for men. I'm not only a member, I'm also a customer also. And so, I hear this all the time, right? And it's not just because she's a lady, but it's impossible to predict what I might need. And so that was one of the issues that we had. What data do you bring? What do you not bring? And then I need to approach the data in a relatively quick and easy time frame. I can't launch another EMR. I can't wait another 30, 40 seconds even in my workflow, whether I'm in the clinic or I'm in the hospital to find the data. And then that's me at the desk now, so I guess I lost my coat. And it's a lot of data to move accurately, and then we don't have time or energy, and we can't make everyone happy when we look at what data we can bring over. And then I have to satisfy the CFO of both institutions to say, is this cost effective? Am I going to, yes, create this really great system, but it's going to have this huge price tag to it. So round one. So we pulled over about 2.5 years of CCDA data out of Allscripts and pushed it into Epic. And congratulations to the team. They brought this data over discreetly. So those of you that are familiar with Epic, I could use Epic Search, look at labs. I could trend them in chart review across USF, TGH, and our outpatient TGH encounters, and so it was great. Notes were there. I've always harped on, you look at all these different HIEs that are out there that includes problem list, meds, allergies. Yes, I'm not saying those things aren't important, but as a doc, I think the notes are the proof in the pudding. That's where we're going to look to see what somebody did on the last visit, what things were prescribed, what things changed. And so the notes for me were very important. So those notes came over discreetly into the chart review in Epic along with the encounter-specific data. But the thing that happened was, before HIEs really became anything, everything was on paper, right? Before EMRs, everything was on paper. And so USF had been on all scripts since, I believe, 2006. So we're left at the cross-section of all of that old data that was scanned in. So let's say somebody had an imaging study at one of our ambulatory facilities, and we were on paper at the time, and there's a printed a report of that imaging study. That got scanned in and then indexed into all scripts. No discrete data got put in. So yes, I can see that an imaging encounter happened, but there was no data attached in our prior CCDA conversion. This way, at least you could bring over the image and the scanned images of whether it be lab results, imaging studies, all of those things that providers would look for that data, but it wasn't there in the CCDA conversion. So I think that's probably the biggest win, is our ability to view these scanned images pulling in from the all scripts data, and we didn't have to take that data and try to get it into Epic. Because again, what do you bring? How do you index it? Those are the expensive issues with data migrations. But as you need it, you could link over, then see the data and pull up the scans from the viewer. So kind of alluded to the problem here, which was that data left behind, which was that encounter-specific data, the images that were scanned. So round two was the emissary approach, and I kind of covered some of how it worked. Again, it's pulling from that all scripts data, right, and pushing it through emissary, organizing it in a way that's kind of different from how all scripts would present it to you, and then present that information in a seamless workflow inside of Epic. So here's kind of how it works and how it pulls the data, back and forth. Again, pulls that data out of all scripts, kind of brokers it within the emissary, and then presents that view inside of Epic. All right, here again is another view. I apologize, the resolution is not great, but you guys saw it on the previous one. So are clinicians really using this? And I think that's the question here. I'll tell the stories of, like I said, my wife is a pulmonologist, so pulmonary function tests are very important to her to see how her patients progress as they have different lung disorders. And so she needs to pull those things up from potentially 10 years ago. So, that ability to pull that up and then match it up with that scanned in chest x-ray at the time is very important to her in her line of work. So, in the first picture we had on the cartoon, she's very thankful for it. I think she probably uses it, and once you have that one user that gets out into the EMR and knows how to do something, it sort of spreads organically as people notice the gains in efficiency that you get from being able to use a viewer within Epic itself. So when we start to look at the data, we probably have on any given day anywhere from 25, 30 users to as high as a little bit under 80. So the USF group has about 500,000 ambulatory encounters a year, and they have about 500 docs. A lot of those are inpatient, some are out. So you can kind of see a large portion of the physicians, residents, students all have access to this, are actually using it. And we went back and looked at the data and tried to figure out why we had these dips. Oops, excuse me. So right here, 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 here. And this is 2016 data, so it just happens that those are Mondays and clinic volume is a little bit lighter. That's the Monday after Christmas, and this is the Monday before Thanksgiving. So, and looking at it, kind of our highest volumes and lowest volumes, and our total API calls are usually averaging around 1,000 to 1,100 calls per day, which is pretty amazing information when you start to look at how much time that saves from a provider actually having to go in and log into all scripts. So what kind of data are they looking at? And I think this is probably the neatest slide in the whole entire presentation, because it really gives you an idea of what the clinicians need. So, when you ask them the question of what they need, they may not know, but once they start using the system, then you can see what they need and potentially tailor it accordingly. So looking at the data here, of course the biggest one was what I referred to earlier, and again I had no way to to prove this theory, it was just a theory of mine, but the scan documents, which are in the brown, usually encompass the largest portion of it. Medications, so that historical data on medications was also very important to them. And that encounter-specific data as we start to look at segregating out those individual things. And you can see that the data is very consistent. So from day to day, it doesn't really change to a large extent. You have a couple swings here and there, but it kind of shows you that they're looking at all of these things. Things like immunizations, which are very difficult to migrate over from one system to another and get them indexed appropriately. That was an easy way, and an easy win, especially for our pediatricians, to go in and view the immunization data. So, it's going to be interesting to see how this data evolves as time goes on, right? Because that's one thing. Right out of the gate, you'd expect usage to be extremely high. As we get out, August of this year will be 2 years. And so as we get farther and farther out, is the usage still high? That's kind of an interesting question I have, and it kind of need to wait and see when we get there what the results are going to be. So our report card, I think when we initially thought about this idea, it was something that we were actually using for another project. We were forming a partnership with another hospital system and wanted to find a way to exchange data back and forth, and out of the ideas created from there is when we were in the middle of the USF planning and implementation process for Epic, and that's when we decided to utilize that technology here. So we actually didn't even think about doing this until I approached Dave and said, I know what my providers are going to say. They're going to say, I don't have my scans. And can we find a way to do this? I think building off of this on what are some of the other things that we can do is, systems become more open, I guess is the best way to put it. Can we then now have transactions go back and forth? Can we have orders and result interfaces back and forth through these APIs and kind of look at the next level versus just the read-only data that we're seeing now? So Dave and Sansoro were there to help us do it at, of course, a lower cost. They made it easier to implement, and the docs and nurse practitioners, resident students could get what they needed on a real-time basis, and something that was easy to navigate and, of course, embedded in their workflow, which is kind of a theme from repeating that so much. I can't highlight the importance of it being embedded in the workflow of the provider because it just makes it easier for them, and there's no other way to put it. So at this point, I'll hand it over to the wiser Dave, and he will go through the rest of the presentation.
Thanks, Pete. Pete, you referred to me as your mentor. I think it's time for me to confess publicly, I hate you. You're younger than me, you're more accomplished than I am, you're smarter than I am, taller, better looking. And you're still practicing medicine too. I don't know how you do all of that. So anyway, what I want to do now is show you a little bit about under the hood, how we actually accomplish this. But what I really want to do is open your mind to what I see as a much, much broader opportunity. This is about much more than just patient record portability, as important as that is, and legacy data. And what I find so interesting about the story, the way Pete tells it, is it describes this rather classic dilemma that we face in healthcare right now. Before I was doing this, I actually had a real job. I was the CMIO at Cleveland Clinic. And the way I've described it to people is, the leader of the Heart and Vascular Institute would come into my office and bang on the table and say, we've got to have more data, I've got to have these applications, I need this, I need that. And all very compelling cases from a clinical and operational side. I see a few heads nodding in the audience. And then the next person through the door, of course, would be my IT director, who would explain that, well, I've already got a 6-month backlog of projects. And, I've got to do the compliance stuff, I got to do the regulatory stuff. They're just, they're the must-dos, and then there's the nice-to-dos. And very often the index of this, the symptom, and I would ask you to think about it yourself in your own organization, is how long is your HL7 project queue? How long do you wait before you actually get to do the work? And then we'll talk about what that work is in a moment. And if you're a digital vendor, then I think the symptom is, how big is your integration team? And I don't know about you, but I see digital vendors all the time where they set out to build this very cool product. And then along the way, they recognized that integration with the EMR was essential. And all of a sudden, they're growing these large integration teams. And in some cases, the integration team's as big as the product team. So that, to me, is a symptom that something's not quite right. Does this resonate with other people out there? Okay, good. I see a few heads nodding, so I'm not totally out in left field. So what I want to do in the next few minutes is talk a little bit about at least our conception of the underlying technical challenge, how APIs actually change the game. They change really your thinking and the dynamics in those kind of trade-offs between, do I make the heart and vascular chief happy or do I make IT happy? Turns out there's actually a way to do both. And then again, I want to also take a few minutes to talk about the broader implications of this, because I think it's far bigger. And if we look outside of healthcare to other industries, there's good evidence to support that belief. So let's start with typical today. My guess is if you work in a health system somewhere, there's a large, I call it the spaghetti diagram, right? It's all those interfaces that you're maintaining. And it probably doesn't look anywhere as neat and clean as this particular diagram. But this is kind of the world we've lived in for 30 plus years. I've got an application. I need to build multiple interfaces. We'll talk about the detail of doing that in a moment. If I'm a larger health system, I may have multiple EMRs that I'm dealing with. So now it's multiples of those interfaces. And good grief, after we go through that whole exercise, the next time we get to do it almost all over again from scratch. Not very much of this is portable from application to application or from site to site. And so you get these incredibly convoluted constructs and the time and the effort that it takes to build and maintain those. And a colleague of mine recently said, this is like pre-industrial. We're not yet in the age of interchangeable parts. And that concept really resonated with me. And if you think about it, if you walk into your integration team, it's a bunch of really smart, highly talented, they're craftsmen and craftswomen. They're building these very intricate kinds of sometimes one-off kinds of, again, I see a lot of heads nodding, so I must be hitting a nerve here. And God bless. It's the issue is not them, it's really the technology and the tools that they've been working with. And as I said earlier, I don't know, I've never been in a health system that didn't have that kind of backlog. And so to me, that is a symptom of there's something bigger and more important going on here. And to simplify it, what we do today is this highly customized approach. It's not reusable, it's not really scalable. To some degree, there's issues around reliability and security. So it's not necessarily a happy place to be. Well, meanwhile, back in the 21st century where everybody else lives, it's a whole different world. And you've experienced that world, because if you ordered a package from Amazon and UPS delivered it, Amazon lets you know that the UPS truck had just been at your house. Had that experience? Yeah, well, they don't know anything about each other's back ends and the deep and dark, dirty details of their databases. They're using APIs to communicate and collaborate. And if you look across the other major sectors of the digital economy, whether it's finance, retail, telecommunications, everybody has migrated in this direction. And so sometimes when I talk about APIs to healthcare audiences, I get this kind of, what are these APIs you speak of kind of look. And it's like, you're using them every day. It's not new, it's just new to healthcare. Does this, again, I've stopped. Does this resonate with folks? Am I making any sense here? Yeah, and so really our vision, and I think there's a number of really cool innovative companies out there that have basically said, if it's good enough for the rest of the digital economy, why not healthcare? And people have taken some different approaches to solving this, and I'm going to talk in a little bit of detail about our specific approach. But the key message here is that as a core technology, this is well proven, it's very solid, And so I think the challenge here is now, how do we make the most of this in healthcare? And how do we go as far and as fast as we can, as quickly as we possibly can? And so our vision is this, it's almost like the USB plug for integration. You should be able to take an application and more or less plug it in. Now, I want to give due respect to people and process, because it's always all three, right? People, process, and technology. And I don't mean to imply that we don't need to still go address those issues. But this technical approach greatly reduces the challenges and the barriers and opens up a lot of possibilities that, frankly, would be inconceivable using the traditional type of approach. So I want applications to be able to code to a set of APIs, and those APIs will take care of the integration to the EMR, regardless of which EMR is on the other side. This should be EMR agnostic. We should be able to, just like I can unplug that USB device from my Apple computer and plug it into my PC, it should be that kind of seamless from a technical standpoint. And as I said, know this is possible. It's been done across most of the digital economy. Over the last few years, I think we've seen more and more demonstrations of this can work really well in healthcare as well. And this really positions us for the age of industrialization, where integration and the building of interfaces is truly, it's reusable, it's scalable, it's hardened. We get to value much more quickly. It's that concept of the way interchangeable parts transform manufacturing. We're on the cusp of the same thing, I think, in healthcare. There was a talk given at Chang this week. I'm going to butcher the guy's name, but Joel Selenikia? And it got a lot of attention. And he was riffing on something Eric Topol said recently about the future of large EMR vendors. Anybody see any of this? Well, I'm the only guy. Well, I recommend you look for it. And you know, Eric's take is we're going to see a kind of disruption, and it's not clear what the long-term future of large EMR vendors will be. Joel's take on this was that the move to consumerism is going to drive that kind of change as well. That's sort of music to my ears, because from my perspective, this sort of approach using APIs provides the technical foundation for that sort of transformation. Maybe the simplest way to think about it is if you're old like me. Old. I remember the old Apple, you know, closed environment, we'll give you everything, we got it, right? That sort of mentality. And at that time and place, it was a wise technical strategy, it was a wise business strategy. But somewhere along the way, Apple realized, no, actually the future is in being open. It's in providing a platform that allows for collaboration on top, and that creates value for everybody, for Apple, for other application developers, and for their customers. And I personally believe we're on the cusp of this same kind of transformation in healthcare. Again, there are geopolitical and business challenges to the change, but we would argue that we've pretty much definitively demonstrated from a technical standpoint, APIs can be the engine to allow us to get there and get there very quickly. So a few minutes under the hood, and I see my CTO is in the back of the room, and he always grimaces when the CMO starts to talk this stuff. But remember, I'm just the dumb doctor. I'm not even as smart as this guy. But let me try to walk you through how this works. So conceive of it as middleware. It's built on a .NET platform, so it's readily scalable, universally available in terms of where to mount it and run it. And there's a couple of key concepts to the particular approach that we use. So the first is we wanted to leverage the tools that EMR vendors already provide to their customers for this purpose. So many of you probably own one of these EMRs or you work with them daily. It turns out in almost all cases, you already own the tools that would allow you to use APIs. And so really, I think part of the genius of our technical team was they looked across different platforms and they concluded, you know what, this using APIs will work, can be done across multiple common EMR platforms. The second thing that emerged from the work of our technical team was, despite what you might think or what others might say, the data models are actually pretty similar. And to me, that's almost common sense, because we're dealing with the context of medicine. So an allergy is an allergy. I mean, there's some nuances, but they're just not going to be that different. And so what they were able to do was to create a normalized data structure. So now, not only are the API calls standard and very powerful and robust, but the data structure that gets returned is the same regardless of which EMR you're dealing with. So now we really are getting to this idea of it should be EMR agnostic. Again, I want it to function like that USB plug. And then lastly, using RESTful web services and building it as end-to-end. So the data is literally pulled from the EMR and moves in real time to its destination or back in the other direction if it's a case of posting. So now all of a sudden what I've got is access to pretty much all the data in the EMR. I can expose and move that in real time. It's EMR agnostic, so it's plug and play across many of the common platforms and can be extended. And because I'm not dependent on the traditional HL7 extracts and all of that, I've eliminated that whole part of the process. So I'm not waiting in the HL7 project queue because I'm not using HL7. So the other tremendous advantage of this approach is it's a rapid install. Typically to install middleware like this it's a day or two. That's the whole thing. We joke it takes longer to get the paperwork done and the server provision than it does to actually install the middleware solution. And that's been a fairly consistent experience for us, and I think others that take this approach would see the same thing. So there's an interesting set of value propositions here. For a busy health system, okay, I'm putting myself back in my office in Cleveland, all of a sudden the conversation and the negotiations between my clinical leaders, my operational leaders, and my IT leaders, they take on a completely different tone because we're not stuck in this bottleneck of the precious resource of those craftspeople. We've really taken that off the table for the most part. Yeah, we still have other issues to deal with. Again, I don't want to oversimplify. We still have the all-important people and process. And sometimes the APIs won't get you 100% of the way you need to go. But it really does. It changes the whole dynamic of that conversation. And I think the parallel, Pete, is to your slide when you talked about the dilemma of, I'm trying to make the docs happy, trying to make IT happy, I've got to do this on budget and on time. And all of a sudden, it kind of changes the rules of those games. It doesn't mean there aren't any constraints, but the constraints look very, very different. And it really can create a win for all the stakeholders involved. And at least from my conversations with you, your docs are pretty happy. I know your boss is happy. I talked to him this morning. And I think your CFO is pretty happy with the outcome as well. So what I want to do now is kind of take this to a little bit bigger place. So solving the problem of records portability and of dealing with legacy data is clearly important. I mean, the fact that this room is almost full tells me this is a real problem. People are really dealing with this every day. And so I'm glad that we're able to share something that's a little different approach that we've become convinced is a game changer in terms of that particular use case. Again, we can expose all that data. We deliver it up to the clinicians in real time. It was a much simpler install, very little in maintenance. Pete, I think we've had, 5 service tickets in 18 months, something like that. 3 of them were your network down. It wasn't me. So just saying. It's EMR agnostic. And as Pete said several times, they opted to put this right into the workflow. And I don't know about you, but my experience is if you don't put it in the clinical workflow, it probably ain't going to happen. And the utilization data tends to bear that out here. But this is much more than that. Again, I think people like Eric Topol, like Joel, and like others see there's a much bigger opportunity here. That in some ways we've plateaued the last few years, And we're struggling now to figure out, how do we drive more innovation? Every CIO I talk to, every CMIO I talk to, I know it's a cliche, but it's true. They're trying out to figure out how to do more with less and do it faster and with more agility. And again, what we can take away from other industries, whether you're talking about the Industrial Revolution of the late 1700s, early 1800s, or the transformation of the digital economy that occurred in the aughts, you see this. You see where this kind of approach really is a force multiplier, that it increases competition. That's the American way. That spurs better quality, better results, better prices. Because we're able to deliver what people need and put it where they need it, the adoption is much better. And I saw this in the work I did in Cleveland, and we see it in the data here as well. It allows your IT shop, whether you're a digital vendor with a large integration team, or you're a large health system with a large integration team, it begins to create some options for you to rethink how you want to deploy those resources. And it's not that people are going to be out of jobs. These are highly skilled, highly talented individuals. Frankly, they're much better things that they could be spending their time on. And then lastly, I think it at least gives us hope about solving the problem of the long tail. The statistic I've heard is that in the United States, 50% of providers are on an EMR with less than 1% market share. 50% of providers are on an EMR with less than 1% market share. That's a really, really long tail. Some of those are in specialty niches. Some of them are on, they're in little regional mom and pop type things. And maybe you're in a large health system and you think that's not going to affect you until you look at your strategy for building an ACO or your plans for mergers and acquisitions. You run into this eventually. So I certainly believed in the one platform solution at one point in my career. I think that history hasn't borne that out. So again, this is a pretty rapid track towards driving the kind of innovation, increased collaboration, giving you more choice, giving you a better user experience, and frankly doing it at a much lower price point. So I kind of have this vision in my head of it's this sort of symphony. I guess you can simplify it and say, it's like the Apple App Store, but I think there's something more grandiloquent going on here. I think that we need to quickly get to the place where health systems can choose the applications they need based on their own priorities, their specifications, their budget. Well, that can only occur if we have this flourishing of innovation and choice, that it's easy to turn things on and off, that the impact on my IT system and on my budget are reasonable and manageable. And the hallmark of this is collaboration, whether it's collaboration amongst the applications or collaboration of care teams across time and space. And I think we will know that we see this when we see variety that actually is reliable and pretty seamless. And again, that's my experience living in the 21st century every day. Don't like the Apple Mail app? Fine. There's 5 others that you can try. Pick the one that works best for you. And I think the other thing that we have to spend a lot of time thinking really hard about is what happened in the last 10 years. So through the HITECH Act and some other stimuli, we digitized healthcare. We got clinicians to put down their pens and start using a keyboard, which is a huge accomplishment. I mean, it sounds kind of silly when you say it that way, but having grown up in the age of pen and paper, I can tell you, it's a huge accomplishment. But I would argue that just got us to the starting line. And now there is this opportunity to really harvest what we've planted. Jim Jergis, the CMIO at HCA, is famous for having said, it's time for us to harvest the digital dividend. And I think there's really something to that. Some of that is about optimization, but I think a lot of this is about really creating clinical platforms. The EMR is a foundation for that, but let's begin to add value on top of that. And allowing individual organizations to pursue the strategy and the approach that makes the most sense to them. You really shouldn't be bound to some third party's strategy, their timetable, their plans for development. It just seems to me like that's a non-starter. Now, this all may sound like a kind of a hallucination, and I certainly have been accused of hallucinating in front of large groups before, but I'm here to tell you this is real. And again, you can look outside of healthcare for the evidence that it's real and that it works, but I think increasingly you can work inside healthcare as well. And I know from the work of my company and others, we're seeing this really broad emergence of use cases. And it's almost as simple as if deeper integration into the EMR would make a difference, then you want to go there. And the other thing that I find really fascinating about this approach is it's enabling something I call building blocks. So Pete, what if we take your early warning software and through this kind of connectivity to the EMR, we also connect it to your unified messaging. So now early warning is going to tell me it's Mrs. Jones in bed 3, and the unified communications platform is going to notify the appropriate care team, the people actually awake and at the hospital, not the guy that went home to sleep. And we can build a kind of automation, and we can begin to string these different functions together to create new capabilities. And again, maybe you're looking at me and thinking I got 3 eyes and I'm making this stuff up, but this is how the rest of the digital world works. And I see no reason why, other than the geopolitical challenges, that we can't do the same in healthcare. So, okay, interesting talk. That's great that you guys did that. And of course, Pete was brilliant, so he was able to lead this thing. But so what? What do you do back home? And I always feel like when you give these talks, I want to give you some practical advice as well. Otherwise, it was interesting, but I don't know that it made the world a little better. And I think there really are some creative and alternative strategies. And because of the way this technology functions, you can kind of dip your toe in the water. You don't have to go whole hog until you're convinced and you're a true believer. And so my advice to you is, start to look for some important pain points. Think about the traditional approach, but consider some alternatives as well. Legacy data is a really good example. This requires collaboration between IT and clinical colleagues. So clinical colleagues need to help identify the priorities. IT needs to understand that, but also understand how APIs in this approach fits into their ecosystem and that it's okay to do this. And then go pilot something. I always like a quick win. Easy but meaningful. And I think this is a place where using APIs actually is a little bit of a secret sauce. As I described it to you, it's pretty quick and inexpensive to stand these things up. So you're not talking about a massive investment in infrastructure or staff time to go experiment and do pilot projects. And so I think that to me is very different from the traditional approach of I'm going to do a proof of concept. Well, all of a sudden I'm standing in all the lines that I'm usually standing for a regular project. There's a real opportunity here, I think, to experiment, to prototype, fail early and often, learn from that, evolve and innovate. Really bring some agility to this work that we typically don't have. And then as always, it's about balance. And obviously I am a true believer in this technology and what it can do. And I think we have solved an important technical barrier today, available now. That frees us, as I said, to redirect resources, and frankly, I think to put more emphasis on the people in the process, so that the net result is we actually made the world a little bit better. I'm a recovering academic, so I could talk for a long time. I have a feeling that I'm about up on it. And just to reiterate what Pete said earlier, we do feel like this has been a satisfier of providers, that almost, ergo sum, the availability of this information in real time And what we see as the continued access of clinical folks is it must be having a positive impact on care. It is a more secure approach in some ways. I don't mean to say it's a panacea for security, but it definitely has some advantages. And we were able to do this more quickly and at a lower cost than the typical solution would require. You acknowledged them up front, but I think you should acknowledge again, because
Sure.
it's always a team, right, Pete?
Yeah, it is. And of course, both IT shops from USF and TGH, and also Nishit Patel, who is the CMIO for USF for the data and analytics side. And then, of course, Joanne Bauer, who really helped kind of implement the project and train providers on how to use it.
We've got, I think, about 15 minutes if there are questions. We'd be happy to take them. Yeah. Sure. So
repeat the questions.
Yeah, let me repeat the two questions, and hopefully I can answer them. So the first question was essentially, I thought HL7 was the only way. And you confessed you're new to healthcare. Welcome to healthcare. It's going to be interesting. And then your second question was for me to just sort of clarify a little bit about how Emissary, our middleware, actually does what it does. So you're correct. I mean, for the last 30 years, at least as I understand it, it was either HL7 or doing essentially extracts of data and sending flat files and that sort of thing. And, you know, walk into any health system today, and that's the vast majority of how it's done. What the whole point of what we're suggesting here is there is an alternative to that. The rest of the world has adopted that alternative and moved on, and that there are lessons in that for what we could do in healthcare. Both take confidence that this can work, but also learn from their experience about how best to deploy. So they're completely different technologies and completely different approaches. You will see some folks in the market that have taken a kind of both-and approach, and there's some pros and cons to that, where they're consuming HL7 and then they're wrapping APIs around that. It's an interesting approach. Obviously, I believe the approach that we've taken, end-to-end web services, is better and gets you the full benefit of that sort of thing. So that's sort of the answer to your second question too. So let me be really clear. This is middleware that it's real-time RESTful API calls. The data is at rest at either end. So when the application says, I need patient allergies, it makes an API call in real time. The middleware retrieves that data from the EMR and passes it back. So it's literally moving the data from point to point in real time. That's the name of this particular middleware. Yeah, you bet.
Yes, I see. There's a common functionality I found from the fire activities going on. It's hot now, and it does provide a RESTful API with all those other necessary components. And the Sonar already had that implemented, and you can easily write the app and embed it into EHR so that it can be included inside of the included in the workflow. So I want to see. I have two questions. One is what is the difference between Fire and this open API? And second question is the middleware that you talk about. Is it what is the adoption rate on that? How many hospitals or providers are actually using the middleware? Because I know that you can have a middleware installed on the provider side and provide APIs. However, I mean that can be only available when that middleware is actually installed and deployed in the environment. And I want to know how many hospitals or providers or networks have actually implemented or deployed your middleware, and I'm wondering if that is the open source software, or is it something that people have to purchase
Sure.
from you?
So let me respond to the fire question first. And I got your pun about fire is hot right now. Yeah, okay. So, you know, my view about fire is, you know, I welcome anything that turns the conversation towards APIs and this general approach. So I think that's a good thing. My read on this, and I've co-chaired panels with the CIO of HL7, is fire will come. It's going to take longer than I think people often believe or talk about. It's an industry consensus standard, and if history is a guide, when we do consensus standards in healthcare, it's kind of like two chefs with a recipe, and Pete doesn't like as much garlic as I do, and I left out the tomatoes. And so it appears what we're going to see is fire will be different. It'll be implemented differently by each of the EMR vendors. The other thing we don't really know is what the cost around this is going to be. So I mean, we could spend a whole hour talking about just this topic. Again, my sort of top line view is, I think it's great. I think, frankly, my view is the more APIs, the better. That's what we see in the other part of the digital economy, is that sort of competition. So I think that's a healthy thing. I do think, if you look at the last Gartner report, and it's not the fire people themselves, but I think a more general audience, there's a fair amount of misperception about what's coming, how soon, and how much it will be. I'm not going to get into the specifics of my company where we're deployed, and I'll be happy to talk with you afterward. Suffice it to say, we're in enough large health systems and large digital vendors that we're quite confident this thing works, and we've seen the benefits. Again, for me, the bottom line is I want to see lots of APIs. I want digital vendors and health systems to have a choice. Let them pick the ones that are best suited to what their needs are. So I think the playing field is large enough for consensus standards and for privately developed types of standards as well. So, yes, sir.
Hi. My question pertains to a couple of different slides. Is it possible to go back to the slides? Any
Sure.
slides? So there was an architecture slide where you talked, where it showed the sort of in really high level terms where the interfaces lived in the architecture. Had a Git and a post. Maybe it's hard to get back to it, but I'll try to describe it. What else? And there was a previous slide that you're probably going to pass through that kind of looked through all the various use cases that were leveraged specifically at Tampa. Yeah, that one there with the bar charts. What I'm trying to determine are two things. With the APIs that were referenced in the architecture, you mentioned again and a post, which suggests that they were that you're writing back to the EMR. To the system of record with those posts. Yeah. So one, did I understand that correctly? I see you nodding, so I'm assuming that's the case. Yeah. Which of those use cases that were implemented at Tampa General result in round trip data to the EMR through those interfaces? So we're not doing any post at Tampa right now. Pete alluded to, we started to talk about where to go. I'm sorry, I missed that part. So so in this particular use case, it's a read only from a legacy system, but okay. And that was just the application and the choice for this particular use case. Okay, so I'll pose my question differently. Well, just to be clear, the APIs, the API set allows you to both read data and to write selected things back to the EMR. And just to elaborate on that in a minute. But that's not determined by the middleware. It's determined by the system of record as to whether there's an API exposed to write the data back to. No, actually, the APIs, the way our software is written, we really can develop those APIs independently. Quite honestly, what I see is it becomes much more of a geopolitical question than a technical question. Pete, you and I have talked about this before, that it's my engineers have looked at this and it's pretty clear, for example, you could write orders, it's certainly historic orders back. It's not so much, I mean, there's some technical issues, but it's really much more about what's the attitude that the organization is going to take about that? As I said, to me, those are more, and they're important questions, but they're geopolitical, they're not technical. One more question, and then we should. Okay. Yeah, okay. Right.
So I've got a question about that stack you showed with Cerner and Epic and Allscripts at the bottom. So there's a lot of variation at the bottom. There's a lot of uniformity at the top. It seems to me that the middle layer there, the data services, is playing a pretty big impedance mismatch exercise. I'm wondering what your experience is in generalizing, for instance, from these 4 to a 5th or a 6th. Where's your pain when you try to add another EMR?
The experience so far has been that the data model seems pretty robust, and so if we encounter pain points, it's where there may be a gap, where the EMR may not have a piece of data that we like to incorporate in that broader architecture. There's something you said in there at the beginning that's really important, because I think it goes to this whole idea of industrialization. You know, today, those issues are often resolved by custom mapping, right? And it takes really smart people and a lot of time to do it. And then the upgrade comes, or the patch, or you do some sort of customization, and now you break those things. And this is really relatively immune to all of that because of the nature of where and how the data is accessed, and then, as you said, the uniform data services. So it's taking, in a way, it's taking that knowledge that resides in people's heads as craftsmen's heads, and it's coding it, it's industrializing it in a way that hasn't happened in healthcare before. Does that make sense? Is that, yeah. Come on, somebody's got a question for Pete. Ask him a hard question.
Pete, I'm sold, and my clinicians would love that, but do you have any tips for pitching to a CFO who says, get what you can get out of the legacy system now, we're going to turn it off, we're not going to pay to keep that running?
Sure. So I think what we neglected to show was we looked at all the nice things about how providers could use the data, but at some point we're going to run into the situation of having to turn off Allscripts licensing, and I think that's what we're looking to right now, at creating, you know, a completely separate data warehouse and getting all the data over to a system there. So we haven't embarked on that journey quite just yet. But with the work that Sansoro does, to me, if Dave's USB connector works as advertised, I would be able to unplug from the Allscripts database and plug into. I just think that some of the limitations around how they let us convert that data, I think we haven't figured out quite just yet. And that's, to me, where the real hard dollars come in from an ROI perspective is looking at that. So right now, again, we still have our Allscripts licenses up.
I guess there's 2 conversations I'd have with your CFO. The first is I would remind him there's a compliance requirement. You got to keep that data. And you know, depending upon who you want to talk to, again, I'm a recovering CMIO, so I don't have to do this anymore. But I mean, certainly people used to say, you know, kids, you keep 18 years. Increasingly, what I'm hearing is keep it forever. So I really, what Pete is suggesting is something that's very intriguing to us, which is at some point, suck it out of the EMR proprietary database that you're retiring. I mean, at least you can turn off the UI licenses now. But suck it out of there. Let's drop it into some sort of standard, I don't know, SQL or something. And then, yeah, we just plug the USB port in over there. I think actually your CFO's got it backwards though too, because if you listen to Pete's story, we actually ended up with much more at substantially less cost than the traditional approach. And I got to be careful because we've never formally quantified that, but it seems patently obvious. We know what was spent to do those initial efforts, and we know what it costs to do what we do today. So in some ways, I think the message to the CFO is, yeah, we still got to pay attention to budget and all of that, but the dilemma is not what it was. This changes the dynamics of that. So am I making any sense? I don't know. Yeah.
I think we have 2 more minutes.
Okay.
Or 1 more minute.
Could you describe, if you have a cloud-based EMR, how this would work?
Yeah, I don't think it makes any difference. Again, where this middleware runs on a really lightweight server, it can be hosted anywhere, and essentially it just needs connectivity to the EMR. I guess typically that's through a VPN. I don't think it much cares whether that EMR is residing in a data center or in the cloud somewhere. Now, I always give the caveat of, I'm just the dumb chief medical officer, I'm not the technical guy. Would be happy to take your card and get you a more definitive answer to the question, but to my knowledge, that's typically not an issue. And since you gave me the opening, I'll also stress what's kind of cool about this is it doesn't matter where you host it. So health system can host it, a third-party vendor can, a traditional hosting firm can do it. And because it's built the way it is, it's highly scalable, you can load balance it, all the things that you would want to do to be able to build something that's massive and reliable over time. So does that help?
Yeah, thank you.
Sure.
Thanks for coming, guys. If you have any
Thanks, everybody.
questions, we'll be up here.